Okay, welcome back to our podcast on Solid Ground. My name is Joe Boyle. I'm the social media specialist at Helicon. I'm joined by our CEO, Jay Silver, as well as our guest, Terrance Sterett from Dauntless Contracting. So the goal of this podcast is to educate the viewer on the FEMA 50% rule and the National Flood Insurance Program. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll have a better understanding of what's the better option for you, whether you need to rebuild your home or lift it based on cost, time, and benefits of each. Well, it's nice to have you, Terrance, on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and more about your business?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Terrance Sterett. I'm a licensed professional engineer, licensed general contractor, licensed roofer. My wife and I own Dauntless Contracting, Dauntless Roofing Systems, and Dauntless Demolition and Hauling.
Very nice. Yeah, so I guess let's get into it then. Jay, so what is the FEMA 50% rule and why is it important for ensuring a home is flood compliant?
Yeah, so the FEMA 50 rule, before we get into it, people have been recently impacted by Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene, unprecedented storm surge, rainfall, and the FEMA 50, where people have been impacted, is a rule where if your building, not the land, the building in specific, sustained more than 50% of damage in value. So just put in a round number of, if your house was worth $100,000 and there's $50,000 in damages or more, that you're required to bring that structure up to the new flood code, which means for most they're up against either having to demolish and rebuild or lift that house to the new flood elevation. And why it's important that counties and cities remain compliant with that, because the National Flood Insurance Program, if a county is not abiding by the FEMA 50, that whole entire county can lose their National Flood Program insurance. Wow. Completely. And I think you've seen that down to give a specific case example, down in Fort Myers right now. People were kind of fed up. They just wanted to get back into their homes and rebuild, and they're in limbo with this FEMA 50, and they just started rebuilding. So what FEMA did, they slapped them with a probationary period to say, hey, you need to make sure that you're enforcing this rule, or your whole entire county could lose its National Flood Insurance Program. And what that could mean is now you can't get any government FFEA, any sort of government-funded mortgage in that area that has lost the flood insurance program. So it could be very catastrophic for that county or that municipality. So that's a little bit about the FEMA 50. In short, you're up against, if the home was $200,000, you have more than $100,000 in damages, you're going to have to lift or rebuild.
Interesting. Okay, and how does that 50% rule impact the decision between lifting or rebuilding a home?
Well, I guess we'll get into with Terrance on. He's has some real life case studies of people that have had to make that decision, and it's not just something you want to make a knee jerk reaction. Oh, I'm just going to lift the house. You really want to, and I hope that's what we bring across in this discussion, is for people to say, hey, pump the brakes a little and really get all your options out on the table and have a thorough understanding, not only, as you mentioned, Joe, down to financial, time, cost, benefit. Terrance will mention, do you love the floor plan? Because I think as we discover, timeline may be similar of the two, but a lot comes down on the financial aspect with the National Flood Insurance Program. That goes up to a cap of $250,000. And if you have an FFEA or a federally backed mortgage, that's the only requirement that you would need to have for that mortgage policy. Now, if you're on the coast and you're in these very high dollar homes that are in the millions of dollars, your mortgage company is most likely going to require you to stack on top of that. I think like a Neptune or an ASI or some sort of additional private flood insurance that at least goes up to the loan amount. The lesser of the loan amount or the value of the home. That way, if you do have a catastrophic event or you're impacted by the FEMA 50 and the house wasn't built to the current flood codes. Now you're either going to have to lift that house to the current flood code, or you're going to have to demolish. So coming down to the financial, a lot of it comes down, I think, the financial aspect, also just personal preference on, do you really want to lift and keep that current floor plan of the house? Right.
Oh, that's good to know. So what if a homeowner disagrees with the county property appraiser's assessed value of their property? What should they do?
Yeah, that's another good one, because usually the county does their own. They have their county appraiser, like in Hillsborough County, you have the Hillsborough County property appraiser. And there are many folks that they don't have any interest in lifting or demolishing and remodeling, and they'd like to just fix the house up and keep it at the same elevation. Now, if that damage, for example, we've seen cases where a $500,000 house or maybe there are cases where the property appraiser for the county has varied drastically by the Florida certified appraiser. So if you want to stay in that house, and not have to lift or remodel, we'd recommend you go out to get a second opinion from a certified Florida property appraiser. And they may say that, oh no, the house is actually, the structure is $400,000, not $200,000. Well, if that's the case and it's $400,000, not $200,000, that just bumped up your fixed cost from $100 to $200 now. So now you have a $200,000 bucket or budget to work with, and you may be able to fix the house and get back into it under $200,000. Okay. And I don't know, Terrance, how do they actually regulate that $200,000 and that you're staying within that budget? Is that by the permits that are pulled or the contracts that they're signing with a contractor like yourself? So if I write a contract with you for, say, $150,000, before I get that Florida appraiser, that second opinion, I'm going to be over that $100,000. Mm-hmm. Is that how do they kind of regulate that to make sure you're staying within?
A lot of the authorities having jurisdiction have a permit packet for, in this case, a storm remodel. So some of them want a lot of information. A lot of the homes that we're doing, we've probably done about 20 storm remodels so far. We'll go in and they want a floor plan. Well, we'll go in and do a 3D scan, create the floor plan, create a budget. A lot of the counties want flooring cost, any finish, paint, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, and you build a budget out as part of the permit packet. And with that, those permitting agencies have guidelines that they're running to cost per square foot. Mm-hmm. They're back checking that and make sure it's not, because if, say, you had that $100,000 value and they want to do a $300,000 remodel, it's going to fly up really fast. They'll figure it out quick. And
okay.
And Jay, you had mentioned the reappraisal. We just very recently had a customer that had a home down in Reddington, and we could have remodeled it within their boundaries, but they were the example, like you mentioned. Their home was exceptionally low. But she's like, well, it was a vacation rental. She's like, if I want to rebuild this, I want to do some changes. I want a bigger bathroom. I want all this. Well, any improvement that you do counts against that FEMA 50. Well, a lot of the counties aren't just 50. They're compressing that. Pinellas County's like, no, we're not 50. We're 49%. They're even compressing it more, which makes it more difficult. So yeah, there's a lot of, it boils down to every home. It's like you were saying, there's options. There's uniqueness to every property, every home. Every home has soil that can be unique. You could have your home that got flooded. It could have some really bad soil conditions. And then you make a bunch of assumptions, but until you get in there and do some geotechnical reports and figure out what's really going on, that's the right way to design it and permit it and moving forward.
And those improvements too, to keep in mind, is that includes your built-in appliances. Some people may say, oh, well, to get under that, I'm just going to do the work myself. And it includes your personal sweat labor is accounted into that improvement as well. So keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But if you are looking to increase your budget because you don't agree with the county, getting a second opinion can give you some more wiggle room.
We've both seen it work firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. So what types of homes are exempt from this 50% rule? Is there a exemption?
From what I understand, I've learned, and they've seen an uptick in applications for deeded historic structures and homes. So if the home is a historic home, they would be exempt from the FEMA 50 rule.
Gotcha. And what are the consequences if a city or county doesn't follow the 50% guidelines?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning in the beginning. It can be very bad for a county or city. If they don't comply, then FEMA can enact either a probationary period or suspension of that county's national flood insurance program. And if that happens, then the homes in that area cannot get a traditional government-backed mortgage, which you could see how devastating that could be to the property values in that municipality.
Right.
And I believe we've seen that in Fort Myers.
Mm-hmm.
They're on a probationary period right now. But it is imperative, and that's why you see counties so on edge with making sure that they're complying. Because if they were to lose that, it can put them in a very negative place.
And it's tough. I mean, it's your property. You want to get in there. You want to get it livable again. We have a customer right now. We're waiting on his permit for going on 6 months now. We started his permit process immediately after the storm. He's over in Crystal Beach. He's had a heart attack since the flood event happened. So you imagine having a medical condition, you can't even live in your home as it's complete. Luckily, they have a second story they can go to that's an air-conditioned separate space, but it's really hard. I mean, a lot of these elderly people, and it's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so going into this case study, so from my understanding, the homeowner had to comply with the FEMA 50 rule, and they were looking to lift their home since it would be the best cost option, but then they really weren't in love with their floor plan, but they didn't think that rebuilding from scratch would be on the table for them. But when they came to you, it seemed like that the costs were going to be kind of similar. Could you go into more detail about this?
Yeah, there's like Jay was saying, there's a lot of different options. It's tear down, start from scratch, right? I mean, if you're in the position you don't love your floor plan, yes, that's the way to go. I mean, because a lot of times lifting, literally, you're taking your home, you're lifting it up, building new structure underneath it. I mean, you really better love that floor plan to do that. I mean, I think that's the minority, but there are people out there that want to take advantage of that. Another option, if you have a home that's built to old code that has CMU walls, and that's the case study I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
We looked at a house up on the river in Pasco, and the customer engaged an architect, got a set of plans that essentially had us demoing the whole existing structure with the exception of keeping the CMU walls and then building above it. Well, they're able to change the floor plan. That's great, but there's a little bit more that comes to it, right? She had to get a geotechnical report, make sure the soil is good. Then the designer wanted to see the footings excavated so they could put a underpinning plan together. Underpinning is essentially just beefing up the footings that are there, because if you take that home, you can't just build it 3 stories up. You have to have that structure right in order to do that. Well, by the time we looked at that home with the work that had to be done and the demolition side, you go from demolition with a scalpel to demolition with a chainsaw. I mean, when you can do it with a chainsaw, you just come there, wipe it out, you're done. The guys don't have to be careful. In her case, where we had to keep the walls, we had to go in very carefully. Essentially, you have a lot of manual labor in demoing this out. You can't just come in with an excavator with a grapple on it and start tearing it down, because if you do that, the walls are going to collapse. You're starting over anyway. So in this case, by the time we bid the set of plans, it was about $1.2 million. A very nice home on the river. And we took a second look at it, just going in, knocking it down, getting going, building it up just like it was the same amount of money.
Oh, wow.
Every home, every one of these is unique. And that's just the example of, this was better off just starting over, really. I mean, in the end, if you start over, you've got everything new, everything built to new code, new concrete, new everything, but it's not the one size that fits all. And I think what Jay and I are trying to say is like every home's unique, every location's unique, and we can look at it for you in ways that that either fit your budget or the most, the best for you time wise. Cause it's not like the person I explained earlier that had the heart attack. It's all about time. He needs to get back in his home, get healthy again,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So how should homeowners assess whether their property is better suited for the rebuilding or lifting?
Really, you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. We have another house up the river. The lady was talking about building up is a wood-framed house. By the time you build up a wood-framed house, you can do it. It can be done. You can go in and beef the exterior walls, and you still have to increase the size of the footings and go up. But it's not the best way to do that. In that case, you can demo so fast when it's a wood-frame home. Definitely, that's the case of wipe it clean and start over.
Right.
Another one. But some homes have good bones. They're and it's not just building a second story on top of the first story. Sometimes it's just bringing the slab up to where you're meeting code compliance with the flood elevation. As long as you get in, different municipalities have different requirements of where that finished floor elevation has to be above the flood zone. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes it's just literally taking the slab up and going up, but that you're really pushing it towards, you're better off starting over as well. But
that's where they're putting in steel structural I-beams. Typically they're also doing underpins because they need a solid foundation and base. So they're doing a push pier down to build a solid footer. And then with hydraulic jacks, they're lifting the house up to the new flood elevation. But then you got to make it look right and look good with the new facade and the siding.
Yeah.
It's from what I understand you can either build upon not lifting the slab, or when you build upon it, from looking at companies that do that, it's ranging at about probably 300 to 400 a square foot.
Wow.
But you got to bring up everything to go, the electrical, all the HVAC, the plumbing. It is a massive undertaking, and with the permitting and the timeline behind that, it is similar timeline to just starting from scratch. You're looking at least a year process to do something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's definitely a process. Yeah. So can you go into more detail maybe in the differences in the cost, time, and benefits between lifting the existing home versus demolishing or rebuilding it? And if so, who should they contact to help them make that decision? Because I know it's a big decision.
Well, a lot of at Dauntless, we have a lot of designers that we work with a lot. So we're comfortable with, we know each other well. And a lot of homeowners reach out to the contractor. Some homeowners reach out direct to a designer, but it all starts with getting a set of permittable drawings. And that has to be done by an engineer and architect, mostly architect on the residential side. So you can reach out to a designer and work through that. But the benefit of working with a contractor and a architect is we have a lot of cost data. So it's like, what's the best here? What's it going to cost to lift it? What's it going to cost to do it, this way, or add a bathroom or whatever that is? We have that cost data, and we can steer the ship quicker when we're involved earlier on.
Okay.
And also I was, as we were just discussing, you mentioned that those architects, engineers, they have backlog right now. And a lot of them aren't, maybe you could share kind of the type of projects they're more interested in focusing on now versus ones that they're kind of pushing to the back of the line.
That's the problem we're working with. We've got, a lot of people reaching out, either wanting to reno. They fit the parameters of FEMA, right? But most of these people are like, if I'm doing this, I want to make changes, So, but the architects that we worked with before before the storm would be all over renovations. Now they're like, we're only taking on new builds. They're being very selective. So to find these designers that can give us a set of permittable plans to rebuild, but it's getting tougher. But if you're building a house back like it was, typically it's just filling out that permit packet. If you're putting it back like it was. And a lot of times they're requiring inspections before the work even starts. The gentleman I mentioned earlier on Crystal Beach, Pinellas County we've been going through this lengthy permit process. They would not, the last step was they wanted to come see the home in its current state before they would do it. Well, they're looking for a couple different things, right? They're looking for unpermitted work. They're looking to make sure it fits the guidelines.
Good to know. Yeah. So what are the biggest risks to a home's foundation when remodeling or lifting it to comply with the new flood regulations, and how can those risks be mitigated?
Jay and I were talking before this, really, it's you've got to control the water. If you've got gutters and downspouts on a home, you say you've just done this beautiful rebuild, you've either renovated or rebuilt it, and you've got gutters that are just water's going direct on the footings. You've got to get that water away from the home.
Yeah, definitely.
You have to direct it away. You're going to cause problems. And then Jay can talk into more detail about,
Yeah, I mean, Terrance mentioned on the one house that they wanted to go vertical to mitigate some risks on the foundation. You're probably going to have to beef up those footers. You might need to put underpins, push piers to add additional support to take on that additional load. Some of the risks when you're putting I-beams underneath and actually lifting the whole slab, you could have risk in cracking things, damaging walls. And to mitigate that, that's not something that Helicon specializes in, but there are companies that specialize in lifting homes 10 feet in the air. They move historic homes to a different location. So utilizing a company that specializes in that type of work and has proven track record of success and not having catastrophic events happen when they're doing it.
Essentially, right. You're lifting something in the air that was never meant to be lifted. Yeah. Another house we were looking at down in St. Pete, at one point in time, and had an addition to the back of it. Well, when the flood came, the addition sunk off the home. So you've got this addition to the home that's probably 6 to 8 inches lower. Well, imagine, you're picking up a whole home that's together. Now you've got to pick something up that's apart. Right. That can get challenging. So back to what Jay said, you better find someone that's got a deep resume with this work, So, and they're out there. There's guys that can do it perfect. There's companies that can do it great. It just all depends on what's the right solution for your property and what fits your budget and timeline.
And do you love your floor plan? Do you love it the way it is?
Absolutely love it.
And look at also resale value. On resale value, you're going to get a bigger return on a new construction home than a home that was Frankensteined and lifted into there and put back together.
Yeah, you're right. So can you talk more about the advantages and disadvantages of using steel framing versus wood framing?
Yeah, steel, we're building a set of townhomes in Crystal Beach, and it had a considerable amount of structural steel in it. You don't see it a lot in residential, but I'll say you're seeing more of it. I mean, you cannot beat steel beams when it comes to cost and spans. I mean, beams that can span distances that are made out of wood, when you're into LVLs or glue lam, those beams are exceptionally expensive. And sometimes they're really hard to get a hold of, harder to get a hold of than structural steel standard shapes. So you just fit it in the end, like a lot of this residential work, you don't even know it's there. It's all built in.
Right.
So it's just cheaper cost. I mean, the structure is a structure, and the cheapest way and safest way to get there is the way to go.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. So Jay, this is for you. Are there specific foundation issues or soil warning signs that indicate demolition is a better option than lifting a home?
I would say on that, as Terrance had mentioned, if the home is already settling and the back half of the house is out of plumb and it's sinking, that would be a sign there is some sort of soil problems. It could be just loose sandy soils, or it could be potential sinkholes there. So to me, a better option if there are sinkhole conditions or if the home is already settling, it's going to be more cost effective to treat that soil once you have a blank slate there, right, and then build upon a solid foundation versus trying to lift and level and underpin that foundation and then build up upon it. I believe it's just going to be more cost effective to start from a blank slate.
Yeah.
If you're seeing those type of foundation issues already, a lot of stair step cracking, slabs that are cracked, those sorts of signs would be something that you may want to spend $2,500 or $3,000 to get a geotech engineer to come out and test the soil. And that can be also utilized in the new build that you're doing to understand what type of foundation system or footing system that you're going to need to support those structural loads of that new home that you're building.
Well worth the effort to get a geotechnical report. It's peanuts versus if there's a problem you're not seeing in the ground. Yeah. Highly recommend doing that on anything you're building, really.
Yeah, I guess that leads me into my next question. Why is understanding the soil conditions critical when planning to rebuild or lift an existing home?
Yeah, that's, again, it's to, on most custom homes in the commercial arena, everybody gets a geotech engineering report, because when you're when you're putting in millions of dollars into a building, you want to make sure, you and the structural engineer, that you're designing a foundation system that is going to support those loads over the long term, and you're not going to have problems with differential settlement, one part of the building settling, because that has some loose, weak soils over on that section of the building, but over here is stronger soil, which can be just very detrimental to that structure. And the cost to fix problems once you have built, as Terrance was mentioning, with a scalpel and having to do things very, very delicately. When it's a blank slate, you can come in there and treat the ground. You can come in and put a piling system underneath the interior load-bearing walls. Well, once the house is, now you're dealing with flooring, you're dealing with plumbing that you're cutting out and trying to drill in piers and lift and level. So the cost skyrockets. So if you have a problem once the building is in place, or the home, the cost is going to be higher, the time frame. So it is very conducive and a smart idea to go ahead and spend a couple $1,000s, get a soil study done, understand the soils. And if you got really great soils there, then maybe you don't need a helical pre-construction piling system, and you can go on a traditional footer and spread footing and save the cost there. But it's good practice to know, instead of just, we see a lot of the tract home communities, they don't do much soil testing, and then they have problems later on. But I think in Florida, it is becoming more commonplace, especially with the custom home builds in the commercial arena, that a soil study makes a lot of sense and value to have that done before you start building.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So why should a homeowner consider a Pier foundation system when they're lifting an existing home or demolishing or rebuilding? And what long-term benefits can they expect from this, with this investment?
Yeah, down to again, making sure your investment is on solid ground and protected, that it's not going to settle once that is in place, and you have to spend more money, as I mentioned, to go back and underpin or use helical piles. And the long-term benefits, just resale value, a home that is on a solid foundation system, and people, they're aware now on that a house, on whether that's, we're biased to steel, galvanized structural steel helical piles or an underpinning system, but whether it's on that or a timber pile system, in some areas, high velocity wind zones, it's not an option. You've got to have the house on that, especially with pools and these pools that are in the storm surge areas, where you have these hydrostatic pressure events, where you have all of that rushing water coming in, and it can pop your pool out of the ground. Well, if your pool pops out of the ground, that's a catastrophic event. You're going to have to rip out and replace the pool. So we see in most coastal areas that have tidal or storm surge potential, that helical piles or a timber pile system is a requirement for the pool.
Interesting. Yeah, that was going to lead me to my next question again. Like, how does it impact the pool's foundation? Like, how can it be protected with that system? And also, what are the best practices for maintaining the foundation of a lifted or rebuilt home over time for the both of you?
I would think just keep an eye on your structure. If you see any unique cracks, like, call a professional. And that could stem from what I explained earlier. If the water drainage isn't right, or it could be something underground. So you didn't do a geotechnical report, which is very common on the residential side. You come in a building, you had a problem there, you didn't find it, you didn't know about it, you didn't design the footings to it. And but any cracking, you better keep close tabs on it, especially if it's changing over time. I mean, maintenance wise, that's probably the most important thing, I would think.
Yeah, I think Terrance hit it on the head earlier about drainage. If the best practice for maintaining the foundation is ensuring that your drainage system is designed to direct the water away from the foundation. If you're building on a river or on a coastal area, especially if you're rebuilding, make sure that drainage system you put in has enough capacity to drain that water out to the whether that's the creek, the canal, the lake, so you don't have that water rushing along the foundation. In some of these flood events that we've had, where you have a lot of scouring along the foundation, or that water rushing along the foundation where the capacity is just too great, or you just have water coming from the street flooding into the into your intercoastal or your body of water behind you. One thing that will help to maintain that foundation is if you did put in a deep foundation system like pre-construction helical piles or pins, it's not going to hold that soil from eroding, but at least it's going to extend that load capacity down to the deep soils. So that erosion, that topsoil erosion, which if you didn't have that, could undermine the strength of the foundation to where it could settle and shift. Now that is a unique, you're going to have to come in and do some lifting and leveling with a pier system, versus if you have that in place already, you're just coming back, filling in and bringing back the dirt. You're not having a structural shift type event. But number one, maintaining is getting the water directed away from the foundation. And as Terrance was mentioning, keep an eye out, do an annual, semi-annual walk around the foundation and the walls, looking for cracks or any type of settlement signs that you may see. Because if you address the problems early on, as many things, it decreases not only the cost, but the damage it reduces the damage to the structure if you can catch it early.
Thanks for having me.
No, I was excited to have you on,
it was great to
on
have
the
you.
show. And we hope, the information we shared today can help somebody from, possibly not jumping into one option before they explore the other options to see what really is the true best fit for you and your situation. As Terrance mentioned, everybody's house and property is different. So there's no one size fits all for this stuff. So our hope is that we at least give you some knowledge that will allow you to step back and explore all your options, so you make sure you're making the best one for you and your family.
That wraps up our podcast. Thank you so much for watching. We also want to thank Terrance again for coming on. We really appreciate it. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content like this, and we will see you on the next one.